Good morning, everybody. Welcome to Wednesday webinars, proudly sponsored by the Dairy Standard Agency. This is our third webinar this year, and we are really so glad that you could join us this morning. So welcome. I'm Jacqueline Odendaal from the Dairy Standard Agency, and with me is Jandrik Klopper from Plaas Media, who will facilitate the question and answer session at the end of the presentation. A special thanks to Plaas Media for the marketing and technical support. As I've mentioned, we will be having a Q&A session at the end of the presentation. So you are welcome to write your questions in the Q&A bar, or you can raise your hand at the end of the presentation, and then you can ask your question or questions directly to the presenter. Our topic for today is brucellosis, know your enemy. Now, indeed, it is an enemy, as this disease erodes your profits and it threatens your health. So we are in the fortunate position to have a well-known expert, Dr. Mark Chimes, with us today to educate us on the symptoms, the danger to humans and livestock, how to prevent it entering your herd, and how to eradicate it if your herd is infected. So it gives me an absolute great pleasure to introduce Dr. Mark Chimes, veterinary advisor and the manager of the Animal Health and Welfare Program for Milk South Africa. So over to you, Dr. Mark. We are looking forward to your presentation.
Thank you, Jacqueline, and welcome everybody. Thank you for the opportunity as well. With all the foot and mouth disease going on in the country, brucellosis has sort of taken a bit of a back seat to everything, but it hasn't disappeared and it is still a problem in the country. Now, this is a map showing all the farms that tested positive for brucellosis in the 4 years from 2018 to 2022. I couldn't find a more recent map, but it does give you a pretty good idea of how much of a problem it is in the country, and I can guarantee that the situation currently looks even worse than that. And you will notice that it is concentrated mainly in the beef production areas and less so in the dairy areas. And the reason for that is that the dairy farms are expected to test their animals at least once every 2 years, if not on a more regular basis. And the problem is that you are not legally required or forced to test your animals for brucellosis. But if you do test and you become positive, then you are legally required to report it. And then the state vet gets involved, you get placed under quarantine, and then you may not sell those animals. That may only go to an abattoir that is approved to slaughter brucellosis cases. So you can let the animals grow out, but then they must go to these abattoirs, and then you lose a premium on the meat as well. Now, I'm going to read a testimony from a farmer that got brucellosis on his farm. And if this does not convince you that this is a disease that requires serious attention, then I'm never going to be able to convince you. And it says here, we farm in an area in the Western Cape that had not had brucellosis cases for several years. And over the years, most farmers had stopped vaccinating for brucellosis since there were no positive herds in the area, and everybody was very careful to only buy animals from brucellosis-free animals if they bought any animals at all. We all thought our biosecurity measures were good enough, and as a result, we had stopped vaccinating against brucellosis to save costs. We only picked up that we had brucellosis during our routine biannual testing for TB and brucellosis in 2014. Remember, this is in 2014. We did not have any abortions yet to indicate that something was wrong. Cases started to increase, and by 2015, we once had 130 cows testing positive in one go. Our neighboring farm had brought beef cattle from the Free State to rear for slaughter. His herd was tested and 80 out of 140 head tested positive. He had bought the cattle in good faith and did not know that they had brucellosis. This farmer didn't realize that, you only buy cattle from brucellosis-free herds. He never thought of it, probably even never heard of the disease prior to this happening. So nobody wanted this disease to become endemic in this area. So a meeting was held with all the stakeholders and local farmers, and a biosecurity protocol was agreed. The milk lorry would collect milk from our farm as the last stop on the route every day, so that they did not visit any other farms immediately after our milk was collected. And the same applied to the truck that collected any animals for slaughter. And everybody monitored any animal movements in the area. Any vehicle that carried cattle would be pulled over and questioned as to the origin and destination of the cattle. Nobody could bring any animals into or out of the area without being certified free of brucellosis. Remember, we have a lot of buffalo farmers in the area as well that are disease-free buffalo. And obviously they didn't want brucellosis to get into their buffalo herds as well. And they got very involved in trying to control movement of animals. Since the outbreak, our whole herd was tested every month. All animals, positive animals, were immediately isolated and sent for slaughter as soon as possible. If a cow tested positive, we slaughtered her offspring, the replacement heifers, as well. If a cow had tested negative for 2 tests and then tested positive, we regarded that as a new infection, and then we did not slaughter her offspring if they were born before the first negative test. If a lactating cow tested positive and she was not pregnant yet, we would keep her to finish her lactation. They were kept isolated, milked last, and slaughtered once their lactation finished. All steam-up cows were tested every 2 weeks and slaughtered immediately if positive. The milk parlor was disinfected with formalin daily. Afterbirths were collected twice daily, and the areas where the cows calved were marked with a little red flag and were sprayed with disinfectant. Calves were raised on milk formula. No fresh milk was given to calves. Since S19 vaccine was in short supply at the time, we would vaccinate the calves with a quarter dose of RB51 at 4 months old, half a dose of RB51 at 9 months, and then a full dose every year after that. Initially, we tested the herd every month. Once the whole herd tested clear, we would test them 3 months later. If there were any positive results, we would start testing every month again until we got a clear test. It is now in 2023. Remember, this started in 2014. It is now 6 months since we last tested positive. If we stay clean for 12 months, our herd will be declared brucellosis-free at last. It is more than 8 years ago that we tested positive, and only now are we almost in the clear. A total of 820 positive animals had been slaughtered to date. We only got 3,000 to 4,000 rands for the meat per animal that we slaughtered, but we had to buy replacement animals for 11,000 rands each. Make sure that you vaccinate your animals no matter how good your biosecurity measures are. If we had vaccinated our herd regularly before the outbreak, we might have been able to eradicate it a lot sooner and lost far fewer animals. It has been a really tough 8 years. Then there was a neighboring farm that had also got brucellosis, and they say similar things, where they only slaughtered the replacement heifers of positive cows if they were younger than 3 months old at the time that the cow tested positive. And in their case, it says here, it has been more than 7 years since we first tested positive, and the end is only now in sight. So why all the fuss? I mean, if that testament from farmers that got it doesn't tell you or convince you as to that the disease needs to be taken seriously and you do not want to get the disease, prevention is much better than a cure. First of all, it is contagious to humans. So humans can get the disease from cows that are positive. Secondly, it causes serious financial losses, as was testified by this farmer. He had to slaughter over 850 head of cattle over that period. But it's not only that, you also lose production in milk, and you also get paid less for your meat, and you'll lose your milk premium as well. If you're brucellosis positive, then most of the milk buyers will cut your price by about 10 cents or more a litre. And also, as the testimony showed us, it's an extremely difficult disease to eradicate. The farm that has eradicated it the fastest that I know of managed to do it in just under 3 years, and that was a beef farm. So it is an extremely difficult disease to control. So the human risk, the most common route of infection for humans is by drinking unpasteurized milk from infected cows. So if you have a brucellosis positive farm, you do not consume the milk there unless it is boiled or pasteurized. Even eating cheese made from unpasteurized milk, they all survive for up to 3 months, and the same applies to yogurt and ice cream. So that's why we need to use pasteurized milk. Also, if infected material splashes onto mucous membranes, be it in your eyes or your mouth, and this is where farmers and vets are most at risk, when they, especially if a cow is calving and they go and pull the calf, there's a lot of organisms within the birth fluids, and you get these masses of organisms being excreted at that time. And if you have a cut or something on your hand and the glove tears, or you're not wearing gloves, or it splashes into your eye or your mouth, you can get infected that way. And also, if the organism becomes aerolized, you can inhale it as well, and therefore infect yourself through the mucous membranes, excuse me, of the lungs. The other thing to remember as well is that the vaccines are live vaccines. So it's actual Brucella organisms that have been attenuated to make them less virulent, but even so, and they are infectious. And sometimes if you, especially if you're vaccinating cattle against brucellosis, make sure that the needle is attached properly, because sometimes if you squeeze on the syringe and you squeeze too hard, the needle comes off and you get splashback into your face. And it's preferable to wear protective clothing when vaccinating the animals. Wear gloves, protective glasses, as well as a mask to try and prevent accidental infection from the vaccine. Now, the symptoms in humans, if you get brucellosis, it's very similar to the flu. You know, you get fever, chills, headache, you're tired, your joints ache, and I would guess most farmers that get it don't even realize that it's brucellosis that they've got. And in most cases, a patient, or quite commonly, patients will recover within 2 to 3 weeks, even without treatment. So it can pass. The problem is if the disease becomes chronic, and then you remain infected for life, and you will experience recurrent bouts of this illness. And I can speak of colleagues that I know, veterinarians that have gotten brucellosis, and they have these recurrent bouts of severe headaches, severe fatigue. It affects them mentally. They suffer from depression as a result of this fatigue and headaches. And it keeps coming back every once or twice a year. They have these recurrent bouts where it just flares up. And it can be treated. You need a course of antibiotics, normally 2 or 3 different antibiotics simultaneously for about 6 weeks. And sometimes the antibiotics actually make you feel more worse than the disease does. But it isn't always effective. And then depending on where this organism localizes in the human body, it can cause all sorts of other problems, such as arthritis, spondylitis, which is inflammation of the spine, endocarditis, which is inflammation of the lining of the heart, epididymoorchitis, which is an infection of the testicles and can lead to infertility in males, and it can even lead to encephalitis or meningitis if it goes to the brain. In very rarely does it actually lead to death, and in humans where it does, it's normally from complications from these other organs that got infected as a result. Now, most farmers tend to obviously focus on the economic consequences of the disease if you do get it in your herd. Now, if it's a herd that's never had brucellosis before, you tend to first notice that there's a problem because you start getting these abortions, and they call it an abortion storm, where you can lose up to 30 to 40% of calves are aborted before born. And this is normally in the last trimester of pregnancy. But you also get, sometimes if it's early in early pregnancy, the embryo will die off and will get resorbed. So it has reproductive consequences as well, that you find that your conception rate drops as a result of inflammation of the uterus, be it from abortion or resorption. The calving rate will obviously also drop because you're losing so many calves, and that ends up that you get this extended intercalving period. You start having to inseminate these animals more than average to try and get them pregnant. It can also cause a reduction in milk production indirectly, because it leads to mastitis in some cases, where it lodges in the udder. And if your bulls get it, they can develop this orchitis epididymitis, which is an inflammation of the testicles, and that leads to infertility in their cases as well. Now, how do animals get this disease? Remember, brucellosis, although it causes abortion, is not a sexually transmitted disease per se. Although theoretically it can be transmitted through semen, it is not the main route. The main route is per mouth. And it is where they take in this organism when they come into contact with the birth fluids of a cow that is calved or aborted. And the reason for that is when the organism is first, and then when an animal gets pregnant, they produce a carbohydrate called erythritol in the membranes in the uterus, and this attracts the bacteria in huge numbers, and they accumulate within the uterus, so that when the cow aborts or calves, then all that material is, so all the birth fluids, the birth membranes, the afterbirth, the calf, everything is contaminated with the organism, and that then obviously contaminates the environment. So if the cow then goes and chews on the afterbirth of another cow, or licks the calf, or even just grazes the grass where the cow had calved, she will ingest the organism that way, and that is generally how they get infected. Now, it can also be spread further, obviously, by predators that carry the infected, normally the aborted fetus or the afterbirth, drag it around on farms, such as roaming dogs, jackals, seagulls, crows, whatever the case might be. Also, flies that go and sit on infected material, they fly off to another cow. They love sitting around the eyes and around the nostrils, and the organism can be transmitted onto the mucous membranes and then get into the animal that way as well. Now, what I haven't mentioned yet is that this organism, once it gets into the body, it goes into the cells. It's what they call an intracellular organism, so it hides. And as a result, the immune system does not pick up that the animal is infected, and no antibodies will form as a result. Now, calves can become infected in the uterus if it's an infected cow, and they are born positive. But you can test them, and you will not get the positive test results on these calves, because their immune system will not be picking it up, because it's hiding intracellularly. Calves can also get it through the milk. If the cow is positive, obviously she's secreting a lot of organisms in the milk, in the urine, and in the birth fluids. So they can get it through the milk as well. And as you heard at that farmer's testimony at the start, they didn't give any fresh milk to any of their calves. They only used powdered milk. Or alternatively, you'd need to boil the milk to kill the organism so that you can then give it to the calves. So the result is that these infected heifers will test negative until they have given birth or aborted. Until then, you can test them till you're blue in the face. And if you test them too soon after birth, you might still get a false negative because they still haven't had time to produce these antibodies. So you normally need to leave it at least a month afterwards before you do a blood test for antibodies. And therefore, if you're buying heifers, you need to keep them away from the herd until they were tested at least on preferably twice after they had given birth. And obviously only buy heifers from farms that are certified free from brucellosis. And we'll get to that in a moment. So how does it spread between herds? The farmer buys it. That's how it spreads. It's the most common way for brucella to spread is animals that get moved from one farm to the other. So they pay for the problem. You only buy from reputable herds, preferably herds that have been free from brucellosis for several years. Remember, this is a herd disease. Animals might test negative. You don't. There are farmers which will test individual animals and then give a certificate. Say, oh, this animal was tested. It doesn't have brucellosis, and they put them on auction. That's an absolute no-no. This is a herd disease because that same animal can test positive a month later. They can sometimes take up to 3 years to show that they actually have brucellosis. So the whole herd has to be proven to test negative. So if you had a positive herd, you need at least two tests, at least 3 months apart, that were negative before you can honestly say that this herd is clear. And even then, because some animals can hide it for up to a year, you need to leave it preferably up to 12 months after that herd has come out of quarantine for brucellosis. So how do you prevent the spread? Well, the first part is you must vaccinate. And it said they vaccinate, especially your heifers. Now, remember, S19 can only be given between 4 and 8 months old. The reason is if you give it after 8 months old, your animals will test positive. And even at 8 months old, it becomes a bit risky. I would recommend that you vaccinate them between 4 and 5 months with S19. And then RB51, you give it again about a month or so before you're going to inseminate the heifers or put them to the bull. And then perhaps again a year later. But at the very least, give your heifers 2 vaccinations. One at 4 or 5 months old and another one just before breeding. Then at least you've got some immunity within the herd. And if you ever do get brucellosis, it should help to prevent the severe spread and the severe symptoms that you would otherwise encounter. And you might even be able to get rid of it a lot quicker. So as I said, also when a cow calves or aborts, she secretes large numbers of organisms that infect the environment. So what the farmers do is they will put a little flag marker there, and they will remove the aborted fetuses or the afterbirth as quick as possible. Make sure you bury or burn it, and then disinfect the area where the cow had calved so that you can reduce the number of organisms on your farm. And remember that brucellosis needs cool, moist areas to survive. So muddy, wet areas is where it will actually survive a lot longer. And also make sure that you disinfect your equipment and your milking machines so that you don't transfer it through the equipment that you're using on handling cows to the uninfected cows. So to eradicate it, what you need to do is, first of all, you need to remember, as I said, it's a herd disease. And this organism hides, so you get lots of false negatives. And if the animal has not calved or aborted yet, then it will test negative until such a time. And even then, not all of them will seroconvert immediately and therefore necessarily show you what is happening. So prevention, vaccinate, because if you've got herd immunity, then that's less likely to infect other animals. And the only way to really get rid of the disease is to test and slaughter all the positive animals. Test and slaughter, test and slaughter. And obviously prevent yourself from getting the disease in the first place. You only buy animals from herds certified brucellosis free. There are some people out there that will test their herds with unaccredited laboratories. and identify the positive animals and then hide them and then get the vet out to come and test all the clear ones. So make sure that you buy from reputable farmers. And if you're in doubt, phone the state vet or phone the vet that did the tests and check whether they actually issued the certificate for that herd. Remember that brucellosis is your responsibility. Okay, the state veterinary system is broken. They just do not have the resources or the money to run this properly. And you hear these stories of where the vet wanted to test for brucellosis, and then the state vet or the animal health technician that was supposed to come out, they don't have diesel for their buckies. That's if they've got a bucky. Or they don't have blood sampling bottles, or they don't have needles, or the lab has run out of reagents, or they've lost their accreditation, and it now needs to be sent to a different lab in a different province, and as a result, the farmer has to pay. So in the end, a lot of farmers will pay their private veterinarian to come out and do the testing, and they'll even pay the lab costs, even though it's supposed to be state funded, just to get the brucellosis-free certificate, because they require that to be able to sell their milk to the milk processor. Otherwise, they lose their milk premium on this. So it's very important that you take this disease seriously and protect your herd and your personnel, your family and yourself against this disease. In other words, keep a closed herd. Don't buy animals unless you absolutely have to. And if you do, make sure it's a reputable supplier. And then vaccinate all the young animals on your farm. It is the best way at this stage for us to eradicate this disease. Is if we can get all the heifers vaccinated twice, it will go a long way in eradicating this disease from the country. Test the animals and then slaughter them, any positive animals, and also slaughter their offspring, unless the offspring was born way before they tested positive. Now, the Dairy Standard Agency are in the process of getting accreditation to start testing for brucellosis. It will be the milk ring test initially, and then eventually they will be including the now I can't remember the name of it, but the Rose Bengal test, sorry, which is the blood test. And this also brings me to talking about the state system, is that under the current system, the powers have been divulged or diverted to each province, where they can determine their own policies when it comes to disease control, with the result that in some provinces, say in the Western Cape, the dairy herds have to bleed their cattle every 2 years, regardless of what the milk ring test tells them. If the milk ring test comes up positive, because that's done every month, and in that case, then you will start bleeding sooner. In the Eastern Cape, if you have tested your herd and if they're clear from brucellosis, then you only have to do the milk ring test at least 10 times a year. So normally it's done once a month. So as long as your milk ring test is clear, and it's not the most sensitive of tests, but it's certainly an indicator of whether there's a problem or not, they can just do the milk ring test. And there's some farms there that for 10 years haven't bled a single animal for brucellosis. In other provinces, as the further north you go, the problem is a lot more dire. As I've explained, there's frequently, they don't have the resources. A lot of animals have not been tested. And the problem, especially, and I don't want to just blame the beef herds, but specifically in the beef herds, because you are not obligated to test for brucellosis, they don't. So if you don't know you have brucellosis, then you don't have a problem. Just stick your head in the sand. And so they can keep on trading and selling animals, and that is how the disease is spread. Because once you test, your herd will be quarantined by the state vet. You are then only allowed to send animals to brucellosis-approved abattoirs. You may not sell these animals to anybody else whatsoever. So if you're a breeder or a stud breeder, you can't sell those animals. They get branded with a C on the right-hand side of the neck so that people can pick it up. So I can't stress enough, don't get the disease in the first place. Make sure that you keep it off your farm as far as possible. Now, if you visit the Dairy Standard website, these guides, which basically sums up the talks I've given it now, there is an English version available as well as an Afrikaans version. So just go to the Dairy Standard website and just click on the guidelines limit there. Thank you very much. Over to you, Jacqueline.
Thank you so much, Yandri. You will handle the questions. Thank you so much.
Yes, so if anybody has any questions, you can use the raise hand function at the top of your screen, and I will unmute you. Lisa, you can ask your question.
Yes, thank you. That was very interesting to just catch up on the details again. Just as far as the abattoirs go, which do you know which abattoirs are actually approved to slaughter these brucellosis-free animals? Because brucellosis animals, the last I heard was that system fell away and we no longer actually have official abattoirs approved to slaughter brucellosis animals.
I would be honest with you, I don't know the answer to that question. I wouldn't be surprised though. As I said, the system is broken, and it poses a risk to the slaughtermen, the people working in the abattoir, because obviously they, with all the fluid splashing about, they can become infected as well. They do carry a huge risk. So if the abattoir knows that there's a brucellosis positive herd, they will generally, like these cull cows, especially from these positive tested cows, they will tend to slaughter them last and then take extra precaution with personal protective gear. But whether an abattoir specifically still has to be accredited for brucellosis, I don't know. That was still the rules, as far as I know.
In the chat, someone asks, must adult cows every year be vaccinated?
If you have an infected herd, then they will normally vaccinate the adult cows every year. If you have a clean herd, as I say, if you vaccinate your heifers at the very least twice, as I said, between 4 and 5 months old with S19, and then at just before breeding with RB51, and then some farms will give a booster a year later, and they will leave it at that. So ideally, if it's a high-risk area, then vaccinate every year. Lona, you may ask a question.
Doctor, some of the people say that when a cow calf has a misgeboorte for the first time, and she calls for the second time a normal calf, that she doesn't have brucellosis anymore, and there's no brucellosis that's being spread. Can you just elaborate on that?
Yeah. Well, it's total rubbish. To be blunt, what happens is, if you have a herd, as I explained, a naive herd that's never had brucellosis, and you get brucellosis on the farm, you will experience this brucellosis storm. But and then you will find that the abortions will just drop down, and it'll almost carry on as normal, because the cows have now built up immunity to the organism, but they still carry the organism for life. Once they're infected for life. So although this cow aborts the first time, then falls pregnant, and now she has a healthy calf, that cow has, when she calved, excreted lots of organisms into the environment, and that calf is infected as well. So they both need to be slaughtered. So no, don't think just because they're not aborting anymore that they cleared it. It's not the case. I see in the chat there's a question of, can brucella be spread by a milk truck coming from an infected farm? Theoretically, yes. I don't think it's as big a danger as it's made out, because the trucks, especially the milk trucks, generally do not drive through the camps where the cows are calving. So they're not going through the high-risk areas and then getting it all on their wheels and everything else. So although in these cases, whenever there's a positive farm, they will tend to pick up the milk from that farm last, so that they don't have to visit another farm immediately afterwards and therefore transfer the disease. But and that's part of your biosecurity. That is why you should have an area where all the visitors to your farm needs to park, be it the feed lorry or the milk lorry or whatever, which is normally the case on most dairy farms. And do not allow your cows to actually walk through that area, which unfortunately happens on a lot of dairy farms. But ideally, your cow paths should not be going into the parking area where vehicles tend to frequent. And that should eliminate that problem as a rule. Also, the organism is actually quite sensitive. It dies very easily if it dries out, or if the sun will kill it very, very quickly. But it can remain viable in ideal conditions, in cool, moist conditions. It can, they reckon, in cow dung, say under a cow pat, survive for up to a year. So, and that's why farmers will go and rake these areas where the cows calve, for instance, to break open the cow pats so that they can get, so the sun can get to the organism. And there's another question, says, can humans pass brucellosis to animals? For instance, an employee goes home to cultural land with their own cattle and then returns to work with a vaccinated herd. Not that I'm aware of. It's an interesting question, but I don't think so, no. Because as far as I know, I'll be honest, humans can't even infect other humans very easily. So as I said, it's not really a sexually transmitted disease even. It is large amounts of organism being excreted primarily in the birth fluids. So I would imagine a woman giving birth, and if she was brucellosis infected, that it potentially those birth fluids would be contaminated, but I don't know. And then Lynette Lowe asks, is there a timeline for when the DSA laboratory will be able to start testing for brucellosis? As far as I know, it's at about 3 months away for the accreditation to come through. That was at the last count. Obviously, these things don't always run as they should. And I'm going to steal Jacqueline's thunder here a bit. I think the next talk in June will actually be somebody help me, what's his name now?
Dion Gallis.
Dion Gallis, sorry. We've got a blank there all of a sudden. He will be giving a talk on the laboratory at the DSA. So we're keeping our fingers crossed on that one.
Does anybody else have any questions? Remember to raise your hand. Okay. I will then ask a few other common questions that Mark sent us. So the first question is, how long can the organism survive in the environment?
Oh, yes, as I said, it's generally it's about 3-4 months. It can survive under ideal conditions up to a year. But they reckon if you get rid of all the animals on your farm and disinfect all your equipment, then it should be safe to put animals back in a month later.
Okay, the second question is, what is the quickest way to get your farm free from brucellosis?
Yeah, the quickest way would be, as I said, if you slaughter all your animals, if you depopulate the farm and then disinfect the infected areas, then a month later you can reintroduce animals and you should be safe. The reality for a dairy farm would probably be to switch to seasonal calving, where you only calve all your animals once or twice a year instead of this continuous calving, because then you can test all the animals, get rid of all the positive animals at the same time. It's very easy to disinfect and get rid of all the afterbirths, etc., and to identify which calves need to go for slaughter with their mother, for instance, etc. So it's just much more manageable. Whereas if you're calving throughout the year, you constantly have infected animals excreting organisms into the environment. And it's very easy to let things slip a little bit, and then you've got a problem flaring up again on your farm. So I would encourage farmers to go to seasonal calving if they become infected. In theory, anyway, it just makes the management so much easier.
Is there a human vaccine against brucellosis, and what is the human form of the disease?
The human form is called, it used to be called Malta fever or Crimean Congo fever, because it was diagnosed in Malta during the Crimean War. So a lot of soldiers came home with the disease from the Crimean War. Nowadays it's just called brucellosis, so it's named after the guy who first identified the organism, called his surname was Bruce. And a vaccine for humans? No, there's no vaccine for humans. They are working on getting a vaccine, but because it's a live vaccine, it's actually dangerous to humans. So no, you can't vaccinate against it. And just out of interest, there was a survey done in the Free State several years ago, I think in the 80s or 90s, where they tested veterinarians and farmers for brucellosis, and 7% of farmers and 11% of vets had antibodies against brucellosis. Doesn't mean they had the disease. They might have had it and shook it off, so it's only the antibodies left. And they weren't sure how these farmers and vets got infected, whether it was from handling infected animals or from handling the vaccine. So it's much more prevalent than we think, and it's not very high on the list of possibilities when you go to the doctor. So if you're in a high-risk situation and you suspect that you have brucellosis, you have to tell your GP so that they can test you for it. But unfortunately, you can't vaccinate against it, not yet.
Are there any other questions?
Yes, Vaughan, I see you've got a question. You've got your hand up.
Yes, Mark, thanks. I just wanted to find out if, I don't know if it's been asked and I missed it, if there is availability of vaccinations in the country, easy availability?
Currently, yes. I think as far as I know, the problem has been resolved. There's no shortage of vaccine at the moment. Onderstepoort is, I think, the only one at this stage that has S19. And then there is, I think, MSD or somebody has got RB51 as well. So, yes, vaccines available.
Thank you.
Anybody else? Does not look like there's any other questions.
Good. Oh, thank you so much, Dr. Mark, for an excellent presentation. Once again, you've added value to our industry. So thank you so much. We absolutely greatly appreciate you. And I believe that everybody will agree with me. So thank you so much. As mentioned, we have our next webinar on the 25th of June, and Dion Gallis will give us a bit more information on the testing for brucellosis and also give a bit more information on the DSA lab. So please, we'll keep you posted on our social media, on Facebook, LinkedIn, and you can also just email me on jacqueline@dairystandard.co.za if you want to be part of our distribution list, so that we can make sure that you get the registration link and that we will see you then on the 25th of June. And that's all said. Thank you so much for your time. We appreciate it, and have a lovely Wednesday. Keep well. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.